The Zephyrian Military Academy had taught Commander Vexhai everything about warfare: how to read tactical displays, how to coordinate fleet movements, how to calculate ammunition expenditure rates. What they hadn't taught him was how to watch a species smile while walking into certain death. Vexhai's 4 eyes tracked the human commander across the strategy room aboard the Joint Coalition vessel Harmony's Edge. The human moved with an easy confidence that made the Zephyrian's chitinous plates itch with unease. Captain Sarah Chun looked no different from the dozens of other humans Vexhai had encountered during the 3-month joint training program. Average height by human standards, unremarkable brown hair pulled back in their military fashion, eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge for such a young species. The Devourers have established a forward base on Kepler 442b, Chen announced, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality of remaining steady even when discussing the galaxy's most feared enemy. Intelligence suggests they're using it as a staging ground for their push into the Centauri sector. Around the holographic display, representatives from 7 different species shifted nervously. The Aquilian's feathers rustled with anxiety. The crystalline Vorthan delegation emanated frequencies of barely controlled panic. Even the proud Draconian warriors couldn't hide the tension in their scaled forms. Only the humans remained calm. Vexhai had studied the Devourers extensively. Every sentient species in the galaxy had. They were death incarnate, consuming entire worlds and converting organic matter into more of themselves. Their ships could regenerate from virtually any damage. Their soldiers felt no pain, no fear, no mercy. In the past century, they had consumed 47 inhabited worlds and showed no signs of slowing. The mathematical probability of successfully assaulting a fortified Devourer position is approximately 0.23%, announced synthesizer ClicksTH, the Vorthan military analyst. Its crystalline body pulsed with red warning patterns. Recommend immediate strategic withdrawal to defensive positions. Withdrawal means abandoning the Centauri colonies, Chen replied, her tone still maddeningly even. 12 billion civilians. Acceptable losses compared to total species extinction. ClicksTH responded with typical Vorthan logic. Vexhai watched Chen's face carefully. He had spent months learning to read human expressions, a skill that had proved surprisingly useful in joint operations. The human's features remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. Something that made his secondary hearts skip a beat. We're not abandoning 12 billion people, Chen said quietly. We're going to take that base. The room erupted in protests from every delegation except the humans. Vexhai found himself speaking before he'd consciously decided to. Captain Chun, with respect, the Devourers have never been successfully dislodged from a fortified position. The mathematical realities, math doesn't account for everything, Chen interrupted, and now that something behind her eyes was growing brighter. It certainly doesn't account for human stubbornness. She manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on the planet's surface. Kepler 442b was a barren rock, but the Devourers had been busy. Black structures sprawled across its surface like a cancer, pulsing with the sickly bioluminescence that marked their construction. Organic towers twisted skyward, and between them moved the dark shapes of Devourer warriors. The base is still growing, Chen continued. Our window for action closes in 72 hours. After that, they'll have enough infrastructure to launch their next wave of expansion. Then, we retreat and establish a defensive perimeter, suggested General Mortak of the Draconian Empire, his massive form hunched over the display. Live to fight another day. Chen's smile was small and sharp. Draconians retreating? That's not very honorable, is it? Mortak's throat rumbled with suppressed anger, but he said nothing. Vexhai realized Chun had deliberately provoked the warrior's pride. Humans, he had learned, were remarkably good at reading other species and knowing exactly which buttons to push. I have a plan, Chen announced. It's risky, and it requires precise coordination between all our forces. But it can work. She began outlining her strategy, and, with each passing minute, Vexhai felt his understanding of warfare being systematically dismantled. The plan wasn't just risky, it was insane. It required the coalition fleet to perform a synchronized jump directly into the planet's atmosphere, skipping the normal protocols for orbital bombardment. It demanded that ground forces assault the base while outnumbered 50-1. Most impossibly, it depended on the humans volunteering for what could only be described as a suicide mission. The core facility is protected by a bioneural network, Chen explained, highlighting a structure at the center of the Devourer base. Conventional weapons won't penetrate it. But if a small team can get inside manually overload the power distribution system. The resulting explosion would sterilize the entire base, completed Dr. Yathera, the Aquilian xenobiologist. Her feathers had gone pale with shock. It would also vaporize anyone within 50 kilometers. Exactly. Chen's smile never wavered. Which is why the infiltration team needs to be volunteers. The silence that followed was deafening. Vexhai looked around the room, seeing his own horror reflected in every alien face present. The humans, however, were already volunteering. "I'll lead the infiltration team," Chen announced. "Captain, I must protest," began Admiral Thexnall, the Aquilian fleet commander. "Noted and overruled," Chen replied cheerfully. "Lieutenant Martinez, prepare your demolitions team. Sergeant Jackson, I'll need your best combat engineers." Vexhai watched in growing amazement as human after human stepped forward to volunteer for what was essentially an elaborate form of suicide. They didn't look afraid. If anything, they seemed almost eager. "This is madness," he whispered to his aide, Subcommander Nixtal. "Agreed, sir. Should we withdraw our forces from the operation?" Vexhai considered it. The logical choice was obvious. Let the humans throw their lives away in this futile gesture while the rest of the coalition preserved their strength for a more strategic engagement. But something nagged at him, a memory from his military history classes. Humans were young on the galactic stage, barely 2 centuries since first contact. But, in that short time, they had developed a reputation for achieving impossible victories through sheer audacity and willingness to sacrifice. The Battle of Wolf 359, where a single human cruiser had held off an entire pirate fleet long enough for civilians to evacuate. The miracle at Proxima, where human marines had somehow managed to board and capture a hegemony dreadnought. Every time, military analysts had declared the humans' plans impossible. And every time, the humans had proven them wrong. "Sir," Nixtal prompted. "We're staying," Vexhai decided. "And we're following their plan." The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Vexhai found himself working more closely with human personnel than ever before, and their casual attitude toward their approaching deaths continued to unnerve him. They joked, laughed, played music, and behaved as if they were preparing for a training exercise rather than certain doom. Lieutenant Martinez, the human demolitions expert, actually seemed excited about the prospect of manually detonating a Devourer power core. "You realize you're going to die," Vexhai told him during one of the planning sessions. Martinez looked up from the explosive charges he was modifying. "Maybe. Probably. But someone has to do it, and I'm the best at this kind of work." "That's not logical. You could train someone else, preserve your expertise for future operations." "Commander, with respect, you don't understand humans very well." Martinez grinned, showing too many teeth. "We don't do things because they're logical. We do them because they're right." Vexhai left that conversation more confused than ever. In Zephyrian culture, logic and survival were paramount. Individual sacrifice was honored when it served the greater good, but this seemed different. The humans weren't just willing to die for a strategic advantage. They were willing to die to save people they'd never met, from species they'd only recently encountered. The fleet jumped to Kepler, 442b, right on schedule. Vexhai stood on the bridge of his vessel, watching the tactical display as 67 ships of 7 different species materialized simultaneously in the planet's upper atmosphere. The maneuver was flawlessly executed, catching the Devourers completely off guard. For exactly 4 seconds. Then, the planet's surface erupted with hostile fire. Bioplasma cannons swiveled toward the fleet, while Devourer fighters poured from hidden launch bays. The organic weapon systems moved with fluid grace, targeting multiple ships simultaneously. "Evasive maneuvers," Vexhai ordered, but his helmsman was already responding. The coalition fleet scattered according to Chen's carefully orchestrated plan, each ship following pre-calculated flight paths designed to minimize casualties while maintaining the bombardment pattern. On the surface, the assault began. Vexhai watched through long-range sensors as the first wave of dropships plunged toward the Devourer base. Most were crewed by Draconian shock troops and Zephyrian Marines, but the lead ship carried Captain Chun and her infiltration team. The Devourers responded with ruthless efficiency. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, while ground forces moved to intercept the landing zones. Through his tactical display, Vexhai could see the numbers clearly. The coalition forces were outnumbered 3-1, fighting an enemy that felt no fear and could regenerate from wounds that would kill any normal organism. It should have been a slaughter. But the humans had planned for that too. "All units, this is Chun. came the captain's voice over the communication channel. Remember, we don't need to win a fair fight. We just need to hold them long enough for the infiltration to succeed. What followed defied every military principle Vexhai had ever learned. Instead of establishing defensive positions and fighting conventionally, the coalition forces began moving in seemingly random patterns. Units would engage Devourer forces, inflict casualties, then immediately withdraw to new positions. They attacked, retreated, regrouped, and attacked again from completely different directions. It was chaos. Beautiful, effective chaos. The Devourers, for all their biological perfection, had never encountered this kind of tactical unpredictability. They were designed to overwhelm conventional defenses through sheer numbers and regenerative ability. But they couldn't overwhelm an enemy that refused to stay still long enough to be overwhelmed. "Commander," called his tactical officer, "the infiltration team has reached the central facility." Vexhai focused his attention on that section of the battlefield. Through the sensor feeds, he could see Chen's team fighting their way through corridors of living metal and pulsing organic conduits. The Devourers had pulled forces from other sectors to defend the core, exactly as the humans had predicted. "Explosives in place," came Martinez's voice over the communications channel. 60 seconds to detonation. That was when Vexhai realized the true horror of what he was witnessing. The evacuation of the infiltration team was impossible. The Devourers had sealed the facility, trapping Chun and her people inside. There was no escape route, no rescue plan, no last-minute salvation. The humans had known this from the beginning. "All forces, begin immediate withdrawal," Chen ordered, her voice as calm as if she were discussing the weather. 60 seconds to fireworks. Across the battlefield, coalition forces began pulling back with the same precision they had shown in their attacks. Dropships swooped down to collect the retreating troops while covering fire kept the Devourers at bay. But no ship approached the central facility. Vexhai found himself opening a private channel to Chun. "Captain, there has to be another way." "Commander, this is the way." Her voice carried that maddening human certainty. "Make sure our people get home safe. Your people are dying in there. Our people are saving 12 billion lives." A pause. Then, softer. "Take care of yourself, Vexhai. You're a good soldier." The communication channel went dead. On his tactical display, Vexhai watched the countdown timer reach 0. The explosion began at the center of the Devourer base and expanded outward like a miniature star. The bioneural network that had seemed so indestructible simply ceased to exist, along with everything else within 50 kilometers. The shockwave rippled across the planet's surface, reducing the alien structures to ash and vapor. When the light faded, Kepler 442b was barren once again. But now Vexhai understood why every species in the galaxy had learned to fear and respect humanity. It wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their absolute, terrifying willingness to sacrifice everything for what they believed was right. He had fought beside humans once, and he had learned that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't a gun or a bomb or a ship of war. It was a human who had decided that something was worth dying for. The debriefing session aboard the Coalition flagship Unity's Promise should have been a celebration. They had achieved the impossible, the first successful assault on a fortified Devourer position in galactic history. 12 billion civilians in the Centauri sector could sleep safely because of what had happened on Kepler 442b. Commander Vexhai sat in the sterile briefing room, watching Admiral Thexnall present the tactical analysis to representatives from the Galactic Defense Council. Charts and graphs filled the holographic displays, showing casualty figures, resource expenditure, and strategic implications. The numbers painted a clear picture of victory. But all Vexhai could think about was Captain Chen's final transmission. "The operation exceeded all expectations," Admiral Thexnall was saying, her Aquilian feathers displaying patterns of professional satisfaction. "Devourer expansion into the Centauri sector has been halted indefinitely. The psychological impact on their command structure appears to be significant." Counselor Prexoff, a massive crystalline being representing the Vorthan Collective, pulsed with analytical frequencies. Clarification requested. Human casualties were total for the infiltration unit. This represents a 100% fatality rate for volunteer personnel. "Correct," confirmed the Admiral. 17 human personnel gave their lives to ensure mission success. "Inefficient," Prexoff declared. Superior tactical options existed with lower casualty projections. That was when Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb stood up. Vexhai had noticed the human officer sitting quietly in the back of the room throughout the briefing. Webb was older than most human military personnel Vexhai had encountered, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of long service. More importantly, he wore the insignia of the Human Defense Corps' Special Operations Division. "With respect, Counselor," Webb said, his voice carrying a quality that made everyone in the room pay attention, "you're missing the point." Prexotha's crystalline structure flickered with confusion frequencies. Clarification requested. Webb walked toward the central display, moving with the controlled grace that Vexhai had learned to associate with dangerous humans. "You're looking at this like an isolated incident. A tactical problem with a tactical solution. But it's not." He gestured at the holographic representation of Kepler 442b. "What happened here wasn't just about saving the Centauri colonies. It was about sending a message." Admiral Thexnall's feathers shifted to cautionary patterns. "Colonel Webb, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue." "It's exactly the appropriate venue," Webb interrupted, something sharp entering his tone. "Because everyone in this room needs to understand what we're really dealing with." Vexhai found himself leaning forward despite his exhaustion. There was something in Webb's manner that reminded him uncomfortably of Captain Chun, that same unsettling certainty. For the past century, the Devourers have been unstoppable because they operate on a simple principle, Webb continued. They believe that every species in the galaxy will choose survival over sacrifice when faced with overwhelming odds. They've been right every time. He manipulated the display, calling up historical records of previous Devourer conquests. World after world appeared, each one showing the same pattern: evacuation, retreat, strategic withdrawal, acceptable losses. Until yesterday, Webb said quietly. The display shifted to show the final moments of the Kepler 442b operation. The infiltration team's last transmission. The explosion that had turned 50 kilometers of alien architecture into vapor. Captain Chun and her team didn't just destroy a Devourer base, Webb explained. They proved that humans don't follow the same rules as everyone else. They proved that we're willing to die not just for our own species, but for people we've never met. Counselor Prexotha's frequencies shifted to analytical mode. This behavioral pattern represents a significant deviation from optimal survival strategies. Recommendation: genetic analysis to identify the source of this dysfunction. Webb's laugh was cold enough to make Vexhai's chitin ache. Dysfunction. You think it's a bug in our programming? Affirmative. No logical species would consistently choose sacrifice over survival. Then, you don't understand the first thing about warfare. Webb's expression had gone perfectly neutral, which Vexhai had learned was when humans were most dangerous. War isn't about logic. It's about will. And the Devourers just learned that they can't break ours. The room fell silent. Vexhai could see the other species' representatives struggling to process what Webb was telling them. In their military academies, warfare was taught as a mathematical exercise. Resources, positioning, tactical advantages. The humans seemed to view it as something else entirely. Admiral Thexnall cleared her throat. "Colonel, while we appreciate the human perspective, the Council needs concrete strategic recommendations moving forward." "I have them," Webb replied. "But first, you need to see the intelligence reports we've gathered from Devourer communications." Another holographic display materialized, showing intercepted transmissions from the alien hive mind. The translation algorithms struggled with the biological command language, but the meaning was clear enough. Fear. For the first time in recorded history, the Devourers were afraid. "They're calling us the fire species," Webb explained. "The ones who burn themselves to hurt others. They don't have a concept for willing self-sacrifice in their collective consciousness. It's so alien to them that they're having trouble developing countermeasures." Vexhai studied the intercepted communications with growing amazement. The Devourer's organic network was designed for perfect efficiency, with each unit serving the collective without question. The idea of individuals choosing death over survival violated every principle of their existence. "This represents a significant tactical advantage," announced General Mortak, the Draconian representative. His massive form leaned forward with interest. "If the enemy cannot comprehend our strategies, it's more than that," Webb interrupted. "They're pulling back from 3 separate expansion fronts, consolidating their forces, running long-range reconnaissance on human settlements specifically." The implications hit Vexhai like a physical blow. "They're studying us." Exactly. For the first time in their expansion cycle, the Devourers have encountered something they can't immediately consume and digest. So they're trying to understand us before they make their next move. Counselor Prexoth pulsed with urgent frequencies. Recommendation: immediate dispersal of human populations to prevent targeted analysis. Wrong again, Webb replied. And now his smile held no warmth at all. We're not going to hide. We're going to give them exactly what they want to see. He called up a new tactical display showing human colony worlds throughout the galaxy. Red markers indicated planets with significant human populations, while blue showed mixed species colonies. Every human military unit in the galaxy is being redeployed, Webb announced. Joint operations with allied species, integrated command structures, shared tactical protocols. By the end of next month, there won't be a major military installation in this sector that doesn't have significant human participation. Vexhai felt his secondary heart skip as he realized what Webb was proposing. You're spreading your tactical philosophy throughout the entire coalition. We're teaching everyone else how to be human, Webb confirmed. How to fight like us. How to think like us. How to win like us. Admiral Thexnall's feathers displayed deep concern patterns. Colonel, such integration could lead to significant cultural contamination. Human behavioral patterns might spread to other species. That's the point. Webb's expression grew serious. The Devourers are expecting to face the same predictable resistance they've always encountered. Instead, they're going to face an entire galaxy that's learned to fight with human determination. The silence that followed was profound. Vexhai could see each representative grappling with the magnitude of what Webb was suggesting. It wasn't just military cooperation. It was fundamental change in how warfare was conducted across every species. The psychological impact alone could shift the entire strategic balance, mused Dr. Ythera, the Aquilian xenopsychologist. If other species begin exhibiting human-like willingness to sacrifice, the Devourer's entire expansion model breaks down, Webb finished. They're built to overcome resistance, not determination. They can handle casualties, but they can't handle enemies who refuse to be broken. General Mortak's throat rumbled with what Vexhai had learned to recognize as draconian approval. This is an interesting approach to warfare. My people would be honored to learn these tactics. And we'll be honored to teach them, Webb replied. But understand what you're signing up for. This isn't just about new battle strategies. It's about changing how your people think about war itself. Over the following days, Vexhai found himself assigned as a liaison officer to Webb's integration program. What he witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about military science. The humans didn't just teach tactics, they taught philosophy. They showed Zephyrian officers how to calculate acceptable losses differently, factoring in moral imperatives alongside strategic objectives. They demonstrated to Draconian warriors how honor could be found not just in victory, but in the willingness to ensure others could achieve victory. They explained to Aquilian strategists how emotional bonds between units could become force multipliers more powerful than any technology. Most importantly, they taught every species how to volunteer for impossible missions. The transformation was gradual, but unmistakable. Within weeks, Vexhai began seeing changes in how coalition forces operated. Draconian shock troopers started volunteering for high-risk reconnaissance missions that could save civilian lives. Aquilian pilots began flying suicide runs to protect evacuation transports. Even the logical Vorthans started factoring moral imperatives into their tactical calculations. But it was during a joint training exercise that Vexhai truly understood what the humans had unleashed. The scenario was simple, a simulated devourer attack on a mixed population center. Standard protocol called for military forces to establish defensive perimeters while civilians evacuated through protected corridors. The exercise was designed to test coordination between different species' military units. Instead, something unprecedented happened. When the simulation reached its climax, the point where conventional tactics would require abandoning a section of the city to save the majority, Lieutenant Commander Nixtau, Vexhai's own aide, volunteered for a mission that would almost certainly result in his death. Sir, Nixtau announced over the communications channel, requesting permission to take an explosive charge into the enemy command center. It's the only way to buy enough time for the civilian evacuation. Vexhai stared at his aide in shock. Nixtau was young for a Zephyrian officer, barely past his second molting. He had a promising career ahead of him, and a clutch bond partner waiting for him back on the homeworld. Nixtau, that's a suicide mission, Vexhai said carefully. Yes, sir. But it's the right thing to do. Those words, the right thing to do, spoken in perfect Zephyrian by someone who had never set foot on Earth. Vexhai realized he was witnessing the birth of something entirely new in galactic history. The humans hadn't just taught other species their tactics. They had taught them their values. After the exercise, Vexhai found Webb observing the debriefing session with quiet satisfaction. "You've created something dangerous," Vexhai told the human colonel. "Yes," Webb agreed. "We've created something the Devourers can't understand, can't predict, and can't defeat. We've created a galaxy full of people willing to die for each other. But at what cost? You're changing entire species, altering fundamental cultural patterns." Webb was quiet for a long moment, watching as mixed species units discussed the exercise with new enthusiasm and camaraderie. "Commander, can I ask you something? When you first encountered humans, what did you think of us?" Vexhai considered the question. "Chaotic, illogical, dangerous. And now, the same. But also," Vexhai struggled to find the right words. "Necessary." Webb nodded slowly. "That's what we're giving the galaxy. The tools to be dangerous for the right reasons. The willingness to choose others over ourselves. The strength to do what's necessary instead of what's safe." As Vexhai watched his aide discussing tactical innovations with a young human marine, he realized that Webb was right. The humans hadn't just defeated the Devourers at Kepler 442b. They had done something far more terrifying. They had taught the galaxy how to be human. 6 months after Kepler 442b, Commander Vexhai stood on the observation deck of the flagship Eternal Vigilance, watching the largest fleet in galactic history assemble for what military analysts were calling the final push. 700 ships from 12 different species hung in space around the gas giant terminus, their running lights creating a constellation of deadly beauty against the star field. But it wasn't the size of the fleet that made Vexhai's chitin crawl with unease. It was how they were organized. Gone were the traditional species-based formations that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. Instead, the fleet was arranged in integrated battle groups, each one containing ships from multiple species working in perfect coordination. Zephyrian destroyers flew alongside Draconian dreadnoughts. Aquilian carriers launched fighters crewed by mixed-species pilots. Even the enigmatic Vorthans had modified their crystalline vessels to accommodate liaison officers from other races. The sight should have been inspiring. Instead, it filled Vexhai with a creeping dread that he couldn't shake. Magnificent, isn't it? The voice belonged to Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun, promoted posthumously and then, apparently undeed through bureaucratic miracle that only humans seemed capable of achieving. She stood beside him at the observation port, looking exactly as she had 6 months ago when she'd walked into what should have been certain death. Vexhai had learned not to question human survivability anymore. The official report stated that Chun and 3 members of her infiltration team had been found in a collapsed bunker 17 kilometers from ground zero, somehow shielded from the explosion by a freak geological formation. The unofficial whispers suggested that humans were simply too stubborn to die when they had unfinished business. "You're disturbed by something," Chun observed, her tone carrying that maddening human certainty. "The integration program has been more successful than anticipated," Vexhai admitted. "Perhaps too successful." Chun followed his gaze to where a joint Draconian Aquilian squadron was practicing attack formations. The aerial ballet was flawless, each ship moving in perfect harmony with its alien partners. "You're worried we've gone too far," she said. "I'm terrified you've gone exactly far enough." Chun was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical displays that showed the disposition of forces throughout the sector. The Devourers had been busy over the past 6 months, consolidating their remaining territories and building massive fortress worlds in preparation for the Coalition's inevitable assault. Intelligence suggested they had developed new bioweapons specifically designed to counter human influence tactics. "Tell me what you see out there," Chun said finally. Vexhai gestured at the assembled fleet. "I see 12 species that have fundamentally altered their military doctrines based on human philosophy. I see warrior cultures that have learned to value sacrifice over victory. I see logical races that have begun making decisions based on emotion rather than calculation. And that terrifies you. It should terrify everyone." Vexhai turned to face her directly. "Admiral, 6 months ago, my species valued logic, efficiency, and survival above all else. Yesterday, I watched a Zephyrian engineer volunteer to manually repair a damaged reactor core during combat operations. He died preventing a cascade failure that would have destroyed his ship. He saved 3,000 lives. He violated every principle of Zephyrian military doctrine." Vexhai's voice rose before he caught himself and lowered it to a more appropriate level. "We don't sacrifice individuals for abstract concepts like heroism or duty. We calculate acceptable losses and minimize them through superior tactics. But he wasn't following Zephyrian doctrine anymore, Chen pointed out gently. He was following human doctrine. He was doing the right thing. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Chen studied him with those unsettling human eyes that seemed to see too much. Commander, can I share something with you? Something that might help you understand what's really happening here. Vexhai nodded, though part of him suspected he wasn't going to like what he heard. Earth wasn't always unified, Chen began. For most of our species' history, we fought each other constantly. Different nations, different tribes, different ideologies. We developed incredibly sophisticated ways of killing each other. She called up a holographic display showing historical images from Earth. Massive armies clashing across continents, aerial bombardments reducing cities to rubble, weapons that could sterilize entire regions. We were very good at war, Chen continued. Too good. We reached a point where we could destroy our entire civilization in a matter of hours. Most species would have stepped back from that brink, found a logical solution to prevent mutual annihilation. But not humans, Vexhai said, beginning to understand. Not humans, Chen confirmed. Instead, we did something that every alien observer thought was impossible. We chose to be better. The display shifted to show the gradual transformation of human civilization, the abandonment of nuclear weapons, the establishment of global cooperation, the eventual unification under a single planetary government dedicated to exploration rather than conquest. It took us centuries, Chen explained. Generations of humans who decided that survival wasn't enough. They wanted their children to inherit something worth surviving for. Vexhai watched the images with growing comprehension. You changed your fundamental nature as a species. We evolved past our evolutionary programming, Chen agreed. We taught ourselves to care about abstract concepts like justice and compassion more than concrete realities like resource competition and territorial control. And now you're doing the same thing to the rest of the galaxy. Chen's smile was gentle but implacable. We're giving everyone else the choice we gave ourselves. The choice to be better than what nature made them. An alarm chimed throughout the ship, followed by the calm voice of the communications officer. All senior staff report to the strategy center. Priority Alpha. As they made their way through the corridors of eternal vigilance, Vexhai found himself surrounded by the living proof of human influence. Mixed species crew members worked together with an efficiency that went beyond mere professional cooperation. There was genuine camaraderie, mutual respect that crossed biological and cultural barriers. The strategy center was packed with representatives from every species in the coalition. But instead of the careful diplomatic protocols that had characterized such meetings in the past, the room buzzed with the easy familiarity of comrades planning a difficult mission. We've received intelligence from our deep reconnaissance teams, announced Admiral Thexnall, her Aquilian feathers displaying patterns of grim determination. The Devourers have completed their fortress world in the Vega system. Designation, Nexus Prime. The central holographic display materialized to show a planet that had been completely transformed into a weapon. Organic towers reached into space, connected by bridges of living metal. Bioplasma conduits pulsed with deadly energy. The entire surface writhed with defensive installations that could regenerate from any damage. Estimated defensive capacity exceeds anything we've previously encountered, reported synthesizer ClicksTH, its crystalline body pulsing with analytical frequencies. Conventional assault probability of success, effectively 0. How effectively? Asked General Mortak, his massive draconian form leaning forward with interest. 0.0003%. ClicksTH replied with typical Vorthan precision. A year ago, such odds would have prompted immediate discussions of alternative strategies, strategic withdrawals, acceptable losses. Instead, the room filled with the kind of determined quiet that Vexhai had learned to associate with humans planning something spectacular and insane. Admiral Chun called out Captain Tvash, a young Aquilian officer who had trained extensively with human forces. What's the plan? Chen stood and manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on specific sections of the fortress world. The Devourers have made a fundamental mistake. They've designed Nexus Prime to repel conventional attacks by conventional forces. But we're not conventional anymore. She began outlining a strategy that made Vexhai's secondary hearts skip beats. The plan required simultaneous assaults on 17 different sections of the planet, each one executed by integrated teams using tactics that no single species could have developed alone. Draconian shock troops would provide brute force breakthroughs. Aquilian pilots would deliver precision strikes. Zephyrian engineers would disable defense systems. Vorthan analysts would coordinate real-time tactical adjustments. And humans would do what humans did best: volunteer for the parts of the mission that everyone else considered impossible. The core command center is buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface, Chen explained. Conventional bombardment can't reach it, and the access tunnels are too well defended for a normal assault team. Define normal, suggested Lieutenant Colonel Webb, who had been promoted to lead the Special Operations Division. Chen's smile was sharp. I need volunteers for a mission with approximately 0% survival probability. The team will need to fight their way through 3 kilometers of hostile territory, plant charges in the command center, and manually detonate them to ensure the explosion reaches deep enough to destroy the planet's core. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then, every human in the room volunteered, followed by every Draconian. Then, the Aquilians, the Zephyrians. Even the logical Vorthans pulsed with frequencies that translated to mission accepted. Vexhai found himself standing along with everyone else, his mouth moving before his conscious mind caught up. The 47th Zephyrian Engineering Corps volunteers for demolition support. Later, as the fleet began its final approach to Nexus Prime, Vexhai stood in his ship's engineering section, watching his crew make last-minute modifications to their equipment. These weren't the same Zephyrians who had served under him at the beginning of the war. The careful, logical creatures focused on individual survival had been replaced by something new. Something that calculated acceptable losses not in terms of personal safety, but in terms of mission success and the safety of others. Subcommander Nixtal approached with a modified plasma cutter that could double as an improvised explosive. Sir, we're ready for deployment. Nixtal, Vexhai said quietly. You realize that most of us aren't coming back from this mission. His aide considered this with the same analytical approach he would have applied to any engineering problem. Probability of survival is minimal, he agreed. Probability of mission success is significantly higher with our participation. Logic indicates participation is the correct choice. Since when do Zephyrians make decisions based on the welfare of other species? Nixtal looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Since we learned that we're not just Zephyrians anymore, sir. We're part of something bigger. The assault on Nexus Prime began at dawn, ship time. Vexhai watched from the bridge of his engineering vessel as 700 ships of 12 species launched the most complex military operation in galactic history. The attack was beautiful in its coordination, each element flowing seamlessly into the next like movements in a vast symphony of destruction. Draconian dreadnoughts punched holes in the planetary defenses while Aquilian fighters swarmed through the gaps. Zephyrian destroyers delivered precision strikes to disable specific weapon systems, while Vorthan cruisers provided real-time tactical analysis. Human vessels seemed to be everywhere at once, plugging holes in the formation and providing support wherever it was needed most. The Devourers fought back with everything they had. Bioplasma beams lanced out from the planet's surface, destroying ship after ship. Organic fighters emerged from hidden bays, engaging the coalition forces in desperate combat. The fortress world's defenses began adapting and regenerating, learning from each wave of attacks. But, for the first time in the war, the Devourers were fighting an enemy that adapted faster than they did. Breakthrough in Sector 7, announced the tactical officer. Landing zone secured. Sector 12 breach confirmed. Sector 3 defenses neutralized. One by one, the reports came in as mixed-species assault teams fought their way onto the planet's surface. Vexhai monitored the communications channels, listening to the calm voices of soldiers from a dozen different worlds coordinating attacks with the precision of a single military unit. Engineering team to tunnel entrance Alpha, came Nixtal's voice over the comm, beginning descent to target depth. Vexhai switched his display to show the underground assault. 17 different teams were fighting their way through the maze of tunnels beneath Nexus Prime, each one racing to reach the central command complex before the Devourers could adapt their defenses. The casualties were horrific. Team after team reported losses as they pushed deeper into the fortress world's underground networks. But, instead of retreating or conserving forces, the survivors simply regrouped and continued advancing. Team 7 has reached Depth Marker 3, reported Captain Martinez, the human demolitions expert who had somehow survived his previous suicide mission. Charges placed and armed. Team 12 at Depth Marker 2, proceeding to final objective. Team 3 is gone, but we got the charges placed. Sector is clear for detonation. Vexhai realized he was witnessing the culmination of everything the humans had taught the galaxy. Soldiers from species that had never cooperated were now dying for each other without hesitation. Warriors who had been raised to value personal honor above all else were sacrificing themselves for abstract concepts like duty and compassion. The humans hadn't just taught everyone else how to fight. They had taught everyone else how to be human. All teams report ready for synchronized detonation, announced Admiral Chun from the command vessel. Confirm evacuation of all surface personnel. Vexhai checked his displays. The assault teams had withdrawn as far as possible, but many were still trapped in the underground tunnels. There was no way to extract everyone before the charges detonated. Admiral, he called over the command channel. We still have teams underground. If we detonate now, we save the galaxy. Chun interrupted, her voice carrying absolute certainty. All teams, this is Chun. 30 seconds to detonation. It's been an honor serving with you. The responses that flooded the communication channels came in a dozen different languages and from dozens of different species. But they all carried the same message. The honor had been mutual. Vexhai watched the countdown timer reach 0. The explosion began at 17 different points simultaneously and expanded inward, combining into a single massive detonation that cracked Nexus Prime open like an egg. The fortress world's surface buckled and collapsed as the underground command network was utterly destroyed. When the light faded, the Devourer's most powerful stronghold was nothing more than a debris field. But the real victory wasn't the destruction of an enemy installation. It was the realization that 12 different species had just willingly sacrificed thousands of their finest soldiers for the greater good of the galaxy. The humans had done the impossible. They had created a civilization that was willing to die for each other. 3 days later, as the coalition fleet regrouped and began planning the next phase of the war, Vexhai received a communication from his homeworld. The Zephyrian High Council wanted a full report on human influence over their military forces. They were concerned about what they called cultural contamination. Vexhai stared at the message for a long time before composing his reply. Honored council members, he wrote, I have observed human military philosophy for 8 months and participated in 3 major engagements alongside human forces. My assessment is as follows. Humans represent the single greatest threat to traditional military doctrine in galactic history. They have systematically dismantled every logical approach to warfare and replaced it with tactics based on irrational concepts like honor, sacrifice, and compassion. They have taught us to value abstract principles over concrete survival. They have convinced us to risk everything for the welfare of species we barely understand. They have fundamentally altered our perception of what it means to serve in the military. Recommendation: immediate and total adoption of human tactical philosophy throughout all Zephyrian forces. The humans are right. This is how you win wars. This is how you build a civilization worth defending. This is how you become something better than what evolution made you. I fought beside humans once. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. It was also the most important, because I learned that the greatest weapon in the galaxy isn't technology or numbers or strategic positioning. It's the willingness to be better than you have to be. It's the choice to care about others more than yourself. It's the decision to do what's right instead of what's safe. The humans call it being human. I call it the future of galactic civilization. Commander Vexhai sealed the message and transmitted it to Zephyria Prime. Then, he returned to the observation deck to watch the mixed-species crews preparing for their next impossible mission. And, for the first time since the war began, he wasn't afraid of the outcome, because he had learned something that the Devourers never would. Sometimes, the right kind of terror is exactly what the galaxy needs.